These guys.
These two guys. We're going to try the countdown show, which I used to do with Noel Kassler. The sort of the top stories of the day from the least important, even though they're all important these days, to the most important. And number 7 is that the Fox trial is about to get going. In just 6 days, according to the Washington Post this evening, there's a judge that has very sternly told them that they'll have to show up in 6 days and they have to testify, including Rupert Murdoch and potentially his son James have to testify. It's not going to be an easy ride for them. I think the judge had some interesting words for them, like what did you mention earlier was a credibility problem they might have over Fox.
This is a company that has literally argued in court before through Tucker Carlson that nobody should really take them seriously, which is, they can't get angry when the federal judiciary then goes, yeah, you're probably right. You guys are full of shit. So
they're full of it. To tell Fox News, a news organization, to tell News Corp that they have a credibility problem is quite something. And
Zeb, you called them spies. You just came out and then said they're spies. I came out in 2017 and said they're spies. Let's just dispense with it. They're spies.
I've not said specifically they're spies. I said that they have operated alongside.
The show is Spy Murdoch.
Well, because he operates like a spy, but he doesn't necessarily have his allegiance is to himself, I think. I can't tell whether his allegiance to somebody else or to him, but he certainly operates within intelligence circles to benefit himself. So that's the theory of it. Which
Somebody
is great.
who operates well in intelligence circles is known as a spy, right? But I'm a traditionalist, I guess.
He's certainly been at the very top of his game.
3 circles, there's elephants, there's tigers, and he's on a trapeze, but it's not a circus.
All I can say is that he's associating very closely with spy activities. Because, let me give you an example. There's this thing called Project Democracy that happened in the Reagan years, which was a hidden covert operation.
Where?
Ran out of the NSC. It was meant to be, it was supposedly, would have been under the CIA under a different time, but because the CIA had been wrapped over its knuckles for all sorts of things before, they weren't allowed to do any black ops. So George Bush was the VP at the time, and he thought, why don't we just take that whole idea, we'll put it at the National Security Council, and no one will know the better for it. And we're going to get to fund it. We're going to get all these rich private billionaires to fund it, instead of using only public money. And maybe that guy, Oliver North, maybe he can run the thing because he's good at this kind of stuff. And so it was Rupert Murdoch who then had a dinner and much more, I believe, according to the CIA documents, with Mr. Zwick, who was then the Zwick, Mr. Charles Zwick, who was the USIA director at the time. And it's over that dinner that he apparently committed to funding a huge chunk of Project Democracy. And Project Democracy had 2 sides to it. It had a side which was funding NGOs around the world that were interested in promoting democracy. And then it had this covert activity side where perhaps they were selling arms to the Contras or the Iranians or whomever they might have chosen to do so at the time. Yeah. And the president could never remember anything, so he doesn't know. And and that's how it happened. So does that make him a spy if he's funding spy activity?
Yes.
Does technically make him a spy? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So he's a spy.
Sorry.
I think he was probably doing it on behalf of the Israelis at the time or others, but who knows? Who knows?
Here's the thing. The fact is, you have people that back then who really declared themselves for what they were and who they were, the United States, the Soviet Union. Then you had a lot of people that played the middle. They were middlemen, and that could be as a country, and Egypt, Saudi, Israel, Pakistan. They played the middle. Iran went all to one side. Canada was all to one side. And so you have these countries that are in the middle. And then you had the people that could actually get you Soviet weapons to hand to somebody so that if they got caught with them, it didn't say this was purchased by the United States on them. Those people were often pretty much like the people they were dealing with either in the Soviet Union or the United States, as in spies tend to resemble each other more than the average person does. So
what I'm really interested in is this, because one of those people who was selling those weapons to the Iranians or whomever was Robert Maxwell, who's another well-known publisher of British newspapers and
of tabloids,
actually. And interestingly enough, so is Rupert Murdoch. In fact, they're supposedly rivals during the 60s and 70s, especially the 60s when they're both trying to buy these newspapers in the UK, like the News of the World and the Sun. And I have a sneaking suspicion that maybe they weren't as operating as rivals as much as they were maybe cooperating with each other in a takeover of the British Fleet Street. Because there's a couple of instances where you're just like, how do these people land up together? And one of them is this cold case that we've been covering on our Spy Murdoch show, which everyone needs to tune into. The next episode is on Thursday. But, this is a really interesting cold case involving both Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell in 1969. What are the likelihoods that the two of them would be involved in some sort of murder? And that's just bizarre. Not even the same murder. It would just be unusual. But back to the news. In a few days, he's going to have to testify. He's got a credibility problem. He's got a $1.6 billion damages that could be due at that point. And many people are saying maybe this is the end of Fox News. Maybe it can't survive. I don't know. Maybe it can.
A boy can dream.
Yeah, a boy can dream. If it somehow manages to survive, then it definitely is an intelligence operation. Because who's got another $1.6 billion to sink into something like this unless you're like China or Israel or somebody or Russia? Because, as a business, you'd say, well, this is a lost cause. I mean, I just lost the $1.6 billion and I'm not going to do this anymore. It's not really giving me that much money. The only money I'm getting is from Mr. Pillow. So, and
I'm sure that cotton was not grown in Xinjiang province at all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure it was. I'm sure all that money comes from, yeah. Anyhow, it's made in America. It says it's made in America right there on the label. I've got my Mr. Pillow that I sleep on every night. It's amazing. So this is the story to watch for all of next week. We're going to be on it we're just going to be on it because this is a big story. Fox News has been the number one disinformation, propaganda, mind manipulation entity in America for at least the last 6 years, but certainly a lot longer.
They're the best at it. They're the most successful at it.
They're good at this stuff. And it's time for them to go because wouldn't it be nice if people got some truth in their news? Because credibility problem is a problem for a news organization, said someone.
They can be full of shit as long as they're not like active, hostile foreign intelligence propaganda. I don't even mind if they're wrong. Okay. As long as they are not Beijing and they're not Bibi Netanyahu.
The level of wrongness in their reporting is quite stunning, though. It's like sometimes you're like, how do they even think this works? Why do people accept any of it? But they do. And I won't be crying if Fox News gets shut down, although I do enjoy Succession. Are you watching Succession?
No, I'm watching the actual Successions as empires crumble.
In the actual Succession program, the show, he died. Well, Murdoch's character died this last week, so maybe that's a spoiler. I shouldn't tell.
My favorite Murdoch-style character is in a Netflix show everyone should watch called The Pentaveret, which is about a benevolent secret society. Have you seen it?
Good. So good. You told me about it and I went to see it. I watched it.
Bruce Baldwin. Officially, I died in an unprovoked shock attack. Is there any such thing as a provoked shock attack? I mean...
Technically, there must be if you're another shark. That's Mike Myers, isn't it? It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. Everyone should watch it. So number 6 on our top 10 chart, speaking of Israeli spies and spyware, the study came out of the Monk School here in Toronto, which does all these interesting studies on malware and different kinds of technology.
They do great work.
They do good work. And this stuff you said actually, before we got on, you said has been around for a while, but
we first heard of it in February 2022, but now they're saying it's 10 countries that have used this. We've got NSO Group, Pegasus, then we have Predator. There's a few versions of this, right? And this is Quadream.
Yeah. Quadream, I think, is just a terrible sounding name, but there you go. It pretends to be a calendar invite. It's one of these 0 clicks intrusions.
You're just infected and they have all your stuff.
Yeah. So you don't even know.
Let's call it what it is. These are IDF Unit 8200 cyber weapons that have been sold on the commercial market because nobody actually begrudges Israel doing espionage. They're supposed to. Countries are supposed to do espionage. Yeah. And if they can figure out how to get in our stuff, any country, Nigeria, Burma, Mongolia, hey, if you can listen in, great.
But you never hear about the Mongolian malware that sort of has taken over the world. You just never hear about those. You only hear about the Israeli ones, or the Israeli ones.
These are military type tools, and they usually are used, they're deployed by militaries. I think the scandal of NSO Group is not that the Israeli military has really top shelf tech. Israel has a huge tech sector. They partner with the United States a lot. That's not surprising. It's when they sell it to the Sinaloa drug cartel. That's the problem we have.
Yeah, they tend to choose odd partners for their 8200 clients. They're not necessarily the most democratic, but neither is Israel these days. Really, you look at the Israeli government today and it's not operating in traditional democratic values. So maybe it's not that unusual that they're selling this technology that they've amassed over the years, thankfully, partially to America's largesse, that they have this technology that they can now sell to dictators around the world to suppress people and take away their rights. If this is what Israel has become, then, this is what Israel is. It's sad. So no one wants it
For
to
now.
be that. People need to be aware that there's things out there. It could be spying on journalists, on activists, on politicians. Only you wouldn't really know because you couldn't tell that it was on there, because it'd be some random calendar invite that arrived for an event that already happened. And you would suddenly be infected by this malware that will give you absolutely zero privacy, because your phone can eavesdrop on everything you do in anything vicinity around you. And Israel has not learned any lessons from NSO at all.
But who would really, they target that with, like, people that do like web-based shows about their espionage operations, that kind of,
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I'm not worried about it.
Number 5. He's not giving that look. It scares me. Number 5 is... Okay, so this is a serious story. So this is the shooting in Louisville in Kentucky, another tragedy. People cannot say, there aren't enough words to capture the sadness and the horror that has been going on in America for the last few years, but especially since the start of this year, where there's just been shooting after shooting. And yesterday in Louisville, another shooting. And I can't say very much more on the shooting. I can say what I found really stunning is the speed at which the GOP is able to identify who the shooter is, and also put out some interesting disinformation about their sexuality or their sexual orientation or how they choose to identify themselves. Even before the media has even got a name, these guys are out there with a name and whatever gender you might choose or whatever sexual identity you might choose. And it's happened a few times. It happened the last time after the school shooting in Nashville, when Marjorie Taylor Greene comes out and like does this whole thing about the shooter being trans. I was like, oh, that's really fascinating that you know that so quickly. We just found out she's a woman like 2 minutes ago. How do you know that she's trans? And then yesterday, after the shooting in Louisville, what's his name, Seb Gorka? Some weirdo from
Seb Gorka.
Seb Gorka. You know, this is
Nominally, he's Hungarian, yeah.
Yeah, this is the shooter, the alleged shooter. This is his LinkedIn page since been taken down. You know, he's a very legit guy. He's got a real history of liking his bank, liking his work. We're not sure why he did this. He's got a master's degree. Seems like a legit kind of dude. No one's really sure why he would go and do the shooting. But then Seb Gorka points out just minutes later, this is before the shooter's name is even public. Yes, Louisville color with the he, him pronoun pointed out here, because of course, if he chooses a pronoun, then he must be, I don't know, take your pick there.
Breaking Louisville shooter ID'd, Connor Sturgeon proudly displaying his pronouns.
You might think that's not a big deal, that he's just pointing out pronouns, but we know, because there's a pattern here of them doing this, that every time there's a shooter, that's for some reason, the Nashville school shooting was the second one involving a trans person, as far as I know. And this recent one, we don't know yet, but there's enough questioning around this person's sexual identity or gender that we're not quite sure what it is, but they're certainly not rushing out with that detail. Police aren't in any event. This is the third time I've seen the GOP come out to this thing. And it's worrying, because how do they get this information so quickly?
Quickly.
It boggles my mind that they could find out like that kind of detail as a news person would take you a long time to sift through. Because now maybe you've got his LinkedIn account. Then you got to call his friends. You got to find out what his gender might be and sexuality.
You might be interfering with law enforcement doing their job. What if there's a second shooter and you're disrupting an operation? They don't seem concerned about that. It's almost like they have a head start on who this person might have been.
Which raises a really important question, because if they have a head start on who this person might have been just within hours after the event, then do they know that the event is going to take place before it happens as well? How do they know? How do they know?
In St. Louis, we had a shooting at a local arts high school, and the St. Louis police were closing down. They were securing about 4 or 5 other campuses about 20 minutes before the shooting went down. I've got some questions about how they knew to shut those places down, but they didn't figure out how to stop a single 19-year-old with a firearm. The St. Louis police are not exactly reticent to draw firearms on teenagers.
Yeah, no, so
go up to Ferguson and ask around.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just got there are just so many questions about this kind of pattern over years.
And the thing is, because there's no national study of any of this, because there's no national entity looking into the whole national mass shooting crisis that we're having, because we're not allowed to do that here, it makes you really wonder, maybe that's why we're not finding out that there's some common trend in here. Because the Louisville Police Department will do their investigation, and Nashville will do their investigation. They have no reason to cross-reference whether the people in these rooms in these shootings were also maybe in chat rooms together or in other places together. Maybe there's much more that we're just not knowing about how all of this is put together. There's a pattern here that needs investigating, and we need to look at this whole thing from a different perspective. We need to look at it from a 30,000 foot perspective and see where the commonalities are. Because the other thing that worried me yesterday is this trending topic, which I kept seeing on Twitter as a number one trending topic all of yesterday as the shooting takes place. So why is there, I'm sure Rise Bisexual Warriors had reference to something else, and maybe it was just coincidence. Or maybe there's an effort to do some psyoping around the world. And it sounds outrageous. It sounds like, how could you possibly convince people to do these things? But it's not completely outrageous. It's possible.
Look, it's funny you put this back to back with Fox News. Fox News's target audience is old baby boomers. Now, what happens when you get over a certain age is you start getting nervous about the future because your future is going to be shorter than it used to be. Also, the world's changing in all kinds of ways. That's something that's been going on for centuries now, that by the end of your life, there's enough progress in science and technology and society that things are going to look different, and that can be worrying. And remember, these people vote 80% or more of the time. So if you're trying to keep their attention while your major news outlets are being either investigated for sedition and or sued out of existence, and you've got to keep these people attention, you've got to do more and more outrageous stuff. And I think there's a couple things. I've never advanced this theory before, but of course, something that happens when you get older is your various hormone levels start dropping and your secondary sexual characteristics start going away. And men and women start resembling each other more after age 60, like they do prior to age 14. They met the male and the female, resemble each other more. When they get fertile, they develop characteristics that are divergent.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, you start to resemble each other. And this can be disturbing, right? For that entire block of their audience. So I think there's something that's very primal about, wait, I'm still because you're starting to lose a bit of your gender identity.
Interesting. Look, let's also, the people who have an issue with trans people right now. I mean, there is only one group of people in America that have an issue with trans people right now that I can tell, and that's the GOP. I mean, they're the ones out there constantly telling
GOP propagandists.
Yeah, that seems to be the number one issue on their agenda these days, which is ridiculous considering everything that's going on in the world. I've been around gay people all my life. I know very few violent gay people. They tend to be, they're not as violent. I'm not saying they don't become violent, but it's not consistent normally with the traditions. They're more interested in loving than fighting, I should say that. In most cases, now, of course, there are instances where people might get violent or whatever, but it's just coincidental right now that there's now seems to be, can't confirm it because no one's allowed to discuss any of these details these days. Suddenly the emergence of killers, or what are they saying? Is there a trans warrior army? What is going on here that the GOP is trying to create in this space?
Let's do some stats here. This is why you pay me the big bucks.
Yes,
so trends, when was violent crime the most intense in the United States? Easy, 1991.
Yeah.
Why? The baby boomers, largest generation in American history, is that the pig is going through the snake demographically. And the peak, of course, is 1991. And you peak on two things, violent crime and divorce, because those are things that people do between the age of 25 and about 39. And so when you have this huge proportion of the society is all in this one generation, they're all doing this. And so as a percentage increases. And violent crime has dropped in the United States precipitously every year since 1991 as the baby boomers age out of doing things like holding up liquor stores. It's just how it goes. In other words, America gets safer on average every year and has for 30 years.
But not during the last few years of the shootings. Surely this must be some sort of record we were breaking. That we've got these 146 shootings this year?
That's total. Now that's total violent crime. Mass shootings are up statistically without any particular explanation outside of the conspiratorial.
Guns is number one thing that people point to. And of course, guns matter in gun shootings. Of course, that's an issue. Mental health, of course, that's an issue. But there's something else, because there are guns and mental health issues everywhere in the world.
Let's go back to the macroeconomic trends. The sale of small arms in the United States has continued apace. In fact, it's probably increased 5% year over year since 1991. and the total rate of violent crime has dropped.
Exactly.
So just the availability of guns does not equal more violence per se. There is the AR-15, an Armalite-style rifle that has an extraordinary velocity ballistic coefficient on the round. Coming out of that is explosive. It is a weapon of war. It was designed to replace the M16, and it's fetishized as something to be feared and or lusted after, if you will. And really, it's just another tool that fires bullets and just fires them with a lot of velocity and a lot of impact. And if you add some hollow points to it, it's incredibly damaging. The issue is, why are all these mass shootings happening? And is there, I think the question is, and we don't have answers for this, is there some force coordinating this? So is somebody recruiting these guys? Is somebody identifying with all the digital information that we have about individuals, especially you think about all the leaks of healthcare data? These things go by and people go, oh, that was a news item from 2015. Yeah, 1% of America or 1% of the world population is schizophrenic. Schizophrenics are not violent most of the time. You've got, I think, 1.3% bipolar. I haven't checked all my DSM-5 stats, but that you've got a variety of personality disorders. You've got, what do they call it, the dark triangle of different psychological symptoms and syndromes. Bottom line, though, if you fish out like hundreds of millions of health records at a time, you can identify a handful of people who fit certain characteristics. January 6th featured 25% of the people who were in that crowd had declared bankruptcy in the last 5 years, I believe.
Interesting.
They had a quarter of them had declared bankruptcy at some point. I know that. That is not the national average on that. So it suggests, is that a coincidence? Are those people that felt really hard done by, who believed that America was screwed up and really did need to change because really their American dream had not turned out and was, of course, bankruptcy is very traumatic for people.
For sure.
But how interesting. We know that there were foreign intelligence services that were identifying people who were susceptible to certain types of political messaging, whether it was sedition or racism or xenophobia, anti-immigrant stances. Cambridge Analytica looked at who had an opinion about Obamacare.
We also know that during the early stages of setting up the alt-right, the Chan 4 was where they went and found all their extremists, or whatever you want to call them, and how they groomed their extremists. And they look for certain types of personality. Sometimes they look for people who were on the spectrum. Sometimes they look for people who were what they called incels, the people who were not having sexual lives or whatever it was, bitter about their sexual experience, whatever. We know that this is what these espionage groups and these operatives were doing all the way back in 2015 or around that period of time. So, and the gamer group is another one. This whole gamer community, that's another community that they've been using. So it's not, if you're going to look for a coordinating puppet master in all of this, it might be in those chat rooms. But because we're not allowed for some reason because of the NRA to quantify or to research why gun crime is happening in America, because it's supposedly an infringement on our Second Amendment. And because of that, we don't really know why this is going on. On top of that, because we have no national investigative body that's looking into all these mass shootings. I've been saying this on Twitter the last few weeks, and I really believe that it's important that the Biden administration put up some sort of national task force that investigates these shootings, investigates the actual shootings, but then also identifies what could be the causes of it, and bring in the CDC, bring in all the other expertise that you can have to find out why people are being activated or triggered to do this.
Like, what if there were an agency that dealt with, like, I don't know, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives that, like, looked into terrorist event?
They're not allowed.
Well, see that until Steve Dettelbach took the top slot as administrator of the ATF, there hadn't been a full-time head of the ATF for 7 straight years.
How convenient.
And before that, ATF was the last agency not to be allowed to digitize its records. And the NRA went to the CDC and said, no, you may not look at the health effects of this. Now, who does this really help? Is gun traffickers. This is organized crime in action, as well as hostile foreign folks. We had an interesting news item here in Missouri where Camden County, home of Lake of the Ozarks, the county commissioner, the prosecutor, and the sheriff all said that the ATF has no jurisdiction in their county. And oddly enough, there were some people trying to open up gun stores, and the ATF contacted the county saying, hey, we just want to know some plots of land here. Is this residential zoning or is this commercial zoning? Because there are rules about where you can have a gun store, and you can't have a gun store like next to a daycare. You can't have one like in a residential area. It's got to be like some commercial area. The ATF is trying to help people open gun stores because just as long as they're on the map, right? And on the right part of the map. And so the folks in Missouri here decided that they basically want to secede from the United States, and they get to pick and choose which parts of the Constitution.
This is a problem everywhere. It passed a rule just recently that their local police couldn't assist federal law enforcement agencies in any investigations of gun crimes.
Oh, did Louisville do that too?
Yeah. So that's just been spreading everywhere. This is Kentucky. But yeah, it's been everywhere. So I think
weird.
That's the same thing there.
Missouri had the Second Amendment Preservation Act. It was just struck down by a federal judge. And these are these guys going, oh, that's still...
So this is, yes, it's the mob, it's the Koch brothers, or what's left of them doing their business around America. It's Leonard Leo, you name it. But it's obvious now that this is what's going on.
It's the Confederacy as well.
Yes.
These are all slave-owning states, formally, and they're like, we don't have to follow the federal government if we don't want to. And I'm gonna swear a little here. Yes, you fucking do. You lost the war, guys.
And people are dying. The point is that firstly, the Biden administration has a responsibility to do something really serious and stop this, because we can't keep this going on. And I'm a big fan of the Biden administration, but there needs to be something that can be done. If there's no legislation that can be passed because we have a obstructionist, foreign-owned Republican Party, then we need to do something else. And the only thing we can possibly do is an executive order saying there's a national crisis around gun shootings, and we're establishing an independent body of a task force of some sort that is going to investigate each and every one of these and also look for national trends to understand why this is happening. And screw anyone who says otherwise. That if you're the president of the United States, you can do these things. Presumably. I don't know if you can, but I presume that this is something that's within his gambit. I think it was President Obama that passed the national emergency around gangs. You could do the same thing around guns.
On all organized crime.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Because clearly the FBI is not doing it. And people who, what is the FBI doing? They're not investigating the stuff. They're not doing it. Why? I don't know.
Look, they're actually, I want to just push back. There are dozens and dozens of felon of the firearm crimes all over the place. ATF investigates, FBI investigates. Those are federal crimes, and those are filtered through DOJ all the time. When you're talking about these mass shootings, though, I think when you're talking about the Seb Gorka having the details before the news has the details, there's some complexity in here. And you said we might sound conspiratorial. First of all, I get a little itchy about that adjective.
Yeah.
Because conspiracy is a thing people do. Two, conspiracy is legally cognizable under statutes. It is a definition of certain types of crimes. So talking about conspiracy is not wrong. It's what prosecutors do every day, and it's what intelligence analysts do every single day. But this is a complicated situation. We are seeing patterns that are disturbing. They are indicative of behaviors that cannot be easily explained. And I think that's where special multi-agency task force that does nothing but look at the background of these shootings, looking for commonalities. I think that's a great idea for a policy that needs to happen that goes, wait a minute, because like I was saying, the gun crimes are coming down over time.
Yeah.
2/3 of the gun deaths are from suicides. Right? A lot of people, it's about roughly 10,000 homicides, 20,000 suicides. So that's pretty constant. But these shootings every few days in these major cities with these unusual circumstances, there's more to learn. And neither you nor I think any federal authority is able to address that with rock solid facts that everyone can feel comfortable with. So clearly we cannot have our churches, schools, malls, hospitals, banks in such a state where every American is just playing the lottery every day, and you just hope that it's not your number today.
Yeah. And look, so many people now know people who've been impacted by shootings, who understand that it's designed to do more than just activate shooters and shoot innocent people. It's designed to terrify Americans. It's designed to put us into a state of absolute fear. And I do believe it's terrorism. Ultimately, I think we will discover it's some form of terrorism. And so whether they manage to somehow figure out a way to activate and groom people over whatever mechanism they've been able to, it doesn't preclude them from being responsible and for it still being terrorism. And so, because we have a GOP that's so beholden to this group of organized criminals, of these mob figures, of these intelligence assets. We can't really rely on them to pass any legislation. They're compromised on this issue. They're completely compromised. What we need to do is figure out a way around them, as we've done with other things. There's been a lot of things that we've had to figure our way around, like the use of the grand jury system instead of using investigations. These are different ways of attacking crimes. We can absolutely, I believe, set up a task force that looks at all these things, because too many people are dying and the cost is too great. Ultimately, we're having the effect of all this news coverage, this trauma that we're repeatedly seeing every single day on TV is costing us so much of our innocence, of our confidence, of our growth. If we'll continue to just let it go on because it's a nice political game to play. Oh, the GOP is not doing anything. Naughty GOP. We know the GOP is not going to do anything. The GOP is not going to do anything about guns. They're not going to do it. So trying to yell at them to convince them to do it is not going to happen. We have to figure out a way around it. And yeah, it might be strategically not as interesting from a political point of view, but we still need to do it because people are dying. There's terrorism going on in our streets, and there's trauma happening. And we all know that trauma is much more complicated than we think it is. It's traumatizing for kids. Kids should not be thinking about, am I going to die when I go to school? It's not fathomable in a country that is so sophisticated, so civilized. And yes, we're under attack. Absolutely. We're under attack from a variety of forces around the world who want to destroy America. But this is the front line for me. People are actually dying here. People are dying on a daily basis because of this war that we're having. And you might argue differently, but I think it's the only thing that can account. It's the only different thing that's happening here that's not happening in other countries is that we're under attack for our system of rule. And that reason alone, you should look at these school shootings as frontline terror attacks on us. And it's not the fault of, I'm not taking away the fault of the shooter. Of course, the shooters are responsible, but there might be other factors that are making them do it. And we need to understand what those are. And we won't know until we study it, because how could we possibly know if we don't look at all these things in totality? Number 4. So number 4 is all about the Pentagon Papers. A big Pentagon leak that came out from a gaming group. I guess it came out from Discord of all places, which isn't really a gaming forum, but nevertheless, it's also used for gaming, but it's used for
a communications protocol that you can put documents up on.
Yeah, and there's tons of, I'm on Discord all the time for different chats and different things. And the news out of these leaked documents is okay. It's not everything that we wanted it to be, but it certainly gives you an inside look at how the United States is thinking about the war in Ukraine as recently as March 1st, which is very recently indeed. This is about as close as you can come to a real-time analysis of what is going on the ground in Ukraine. And yes, certainly Russia looks like it's doing terribly on the war front. It is. But there are real concerns, I think, around Ukraine's supply chain. And, maybe they don't have enough supplies to last them beyond May. But I tend to think that the Biden administration is not really screwing up on that front. I would think that they have enough supplies to do what they need to do. There might be concerns about them enough, but I would suspect there's an effort to make sure they're replenished in as much time as they need it. And it does sound like the Ukrainians are having a very difficult war, that the counteroffensive that would have happened this now is not being as effective as it was, because people are really worn down, no kidding, after 2 years of an assault like this. And so those were all interesting things. I was a little, the reality of thinking that maybe Russia could still win this, which is still a possible headline out of this. That wakes you up a little bit, but it's a could win this. It's not will win this. And certainly America is still doing everything it can to support Ukraine along with its European allies. It makes you believe that there's still an effort there that it feels pretty strong.
Dave Chappelle, the comedian, made a comparison with Russia's assault on Ukraine and their inability to win. He's like, this would be like America going to war against Colorado and having trouble. I thought that was pretty brilliant. It's like, oh, these guys, they are tougher than we thought.
They're living in a war zone. It is horrific when you look at it. You see this picture here. It's like,
it's war.
Yeah, it's ugly. It's ugly. There's some other news that came out of these leaked documents. We're not even sure if they're real. We're not even sure. Some of them have been doctored, so that makes it even more complicated. And we're definitely not sure who leaked them. It could be anybody. You could find a case for Russia, Ukraine, America, any other country in the world to have leaked this out. So
my feeling on classified defense information, I believe it should absolutely be read in the SCIF when you have a clearance. And other than that, I'm not really in.
Okay, which is good, because we won't talk about it too much, but there are 2 stories out of there which I'm going to talk about because they're made in the Washington Post, and I just feel like I'm just going to say it. firstly, this issue that came out of the Discord and possible 4chan universe, I think, yeah, we should be looking at those forums. If we're not sitting around those forums investigating and not catching things like this, then maybe we need to step up our efforts and do more of that, because it's not a surprise that these areas are where some of the stuff is getting traded. Oh my gosh, I know you want to not talk about these, but I'm going to talk about them because I have to go through a countdown. So this is the number 3 story. This is involving Egypt, supposedly an ally of the United States, or apparently supplying the Russians with rockets, or wanting to supply the Russians with rockets, according to these leaked documents from the Pentagon. We've known this for a while. Egypt is part of the enemies of democracies and have been since. Didn't you expose this big story that happened in 2016 when someone gave Donald Trump $10 million?
Yeah, CC transferred him $10 million during the campaign.
Yeah. So,
I mean, I like the neon. Yeah. It looks like a new Broadway show. It's a one-man show.
So there's another guy, of course, that's also in the Enemies of Democracy Club, and that is Hungary's Viktor Orban, who, according to someone on Twitter today, said that they identified the United States as one of the party's top 3 adversaries. The United States is Viktor Orban's top 3 adversary. Well, thank you, Viktor Orban. Aren't you a part of NATO? Aren't you our ally?
And where did the Republican Party do CPAC? They do it in Budapest, I believe.
Yeah. And Viktor Orban actually headlined their thing last time around, I think, here in the States. Then he came and did the main speech. So, So just, he gets one of these too, because I'm just enjoying myself so much today. So you're an enemy of democracy too, Viktor Orban. Ding, ding. Not so much an enemy of democracy.
You should do narrative baseball cards with enemy of democracy baseball cards.
Thinking of doing it, I just decided today I've got to be more out there with this stuff, because you just got to say it. Sometimes you just got to say what is the truth, and people can do with it what they will. Number 1 story is all about Emmanuel Macron. And this is your story. So you can tell us all about it.
You honor me. This was so fun.
It's a good one. It's a good story. And I applaud you for finding it.
Emmanuel Macron, president of the French Republic, is a staunchly centrist, staunchly U.S. ally, staunchly pro-NATO president. He's for a strong Europe, and he's a very intel-friendly president. He's aware of all the foreign compromise in his country and other people's countries. And he's so pro-spook that Macron actually reinterred American French entertainer, Josephine Baker, who was a Black American from St. Louis, Missouri, who emigrated to France as an entertainer. He honored her entire life. She took on French citizenship, came back and worked with Martin Luther King, even after she was a French citizen. But she was honored particularly for her work in counterintelligence, bashing on the Nazis during World War II.
She must have been so good at that.
She hid classified documents in her knickers because she was so famous. She knew that even the Nazis would not dare molest her. That it would be so bad for them. She was so famous in Europe that she knew that there's lines that they wouldn't cross with her. And she was right. And she stuffed her pants full of stuff and went to Lisbon and handed it off. It was like real life Casablanca stuff. She was just fabulous in every possible way. And Macron has her put next to Voltaire and the leaders, the absolute leading lights of all of French culture. So that was not just a unification with the United States there, but he's raising up a spook that this is the stuff people like me wait an entire life for. But as punishment, he has a lot of online and media propaganda against him. And one of the things that I've noticed over time is that people constantly, just repeatedly mistranslate him. Also, they're making commentaries about the French president's comments about geopolitics, because we have a French president who is very like Charles de Gaulle in his approach. He believes of France as a leader nation in Europe, and he says consequential things in ways that his predecessors like Francois Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy maybe didn't. And so he's catching a lot of heat for it. Now, I think the American outlet Politico finally stepped over the line where they weren't just not telling the story correctly or adding a frame to it. They were actually interspersing his comments in an interview that happened above Côte Immunité, which is Air Force One for France. He gave an interview to 3 journalists. One of them was Politico, and the French outlet Les Echos published the actual comments, and Politico published these comments cherry-picked with a lot of their opinions submitted as fact. And it was pretty scandalous in what they did.
Isn't Politico now owned by I know you're not very clear right now, but yeah, but I thought that they were owned by German group now, the Politico group, and
Axel Springer. But before that, they were started by the Albritton family, which owned Riggs Bank, that has a very complicated history with Pinochet and some German ties there. And
there's a bit of a competition
9/11
between Germany and France right now about who gets to be the top dog in Europe, and so.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't take that out. But this is a very special crew in particular. So, but that being said, I finally reached my boiling point. I was like, hold on, I'm going to just go through and actually translate this out, because I started life as an interpreter. My first job was in Paris, and I grew up in French Canada, and that's bilingual. And I just went through and just explained a few things generally about French, particularly Parisian high-level French discourse, that it went viral. I was very surprised from a nerd standpoint that it went viral. But I just pointed out, did you know that the French are known for stating things in a very subtle manner that can actually be not that subtle? Or they can say things that are really the opposite of what they mean. This is all diplomats, but it's French. If you want to get really linguistic, French has far fewer words than the English language. So you paint with a little broader strokes, and that leaves you a lot of room to fit in different sentiments. And Macron is just brilliant at this. He's just
has more or less words, by the way. More or less words. Fewer words. The French,
I think 1/3 as many. Yes.
Oh, really?
English is such an amalgamation of so many different languages that we have a greater diversity of adjectives in particular. So we can be very precise about things. And in French, they have fewer words. It's a very developed language, of course.
Yeah.
But just linguistically, you can think of it as just painting with different paintbrushes.
Right.
It's a stylistic thing. It can be a little more poetic, and it can include 3 different meanings, whereas in English, you might be zeroed in.
Right.
And I'm reading Macron's statements about China. And we talked to China, and they're aware that Ukraine is at war with Russia and that we're helping Ukraine. And I really talked to China about maybe they need to take account of what Russia's done in Belarus, moving nukes in. I was like, whoa, because every single word uttered in statecraft matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes from the president of a country, it's thought of as policy. It's thought of as that nation's policy. So when Macron rolls something out like, I told China they need to think about what Russia did. He didn't say that to Mexico. He didn't say that to Namibia. He said it to China, though, because I think he was top-siding something people in the intelligence world know more of, which is that the Chinese bought 10% of Ukraine's land. The Chinese had a lot of deals in Ukraine, and Chinese have a lot of deals with Russia, and that they were probably financing a lot of this Ukraine war. And that's, of course, Macron has the highest level of top secret security clearance in the world, right?
Financing it from the Russian side.
Division 1 ball.
The Chinese
from the Chinese side.
Yeah.
The Chinese
story here. We did a show about this. Yeah.
You know?
The missiles that we spoke about, the missile parts. There's a lot of Chinese weapons and technology finding its way into Russia. And money. They're the biggest clients for all their oil right now.
Right. So Macron is just coming out and reflecting some stuff that, forget a top secret briefing from DGSE, their CIA equivalent. He could just be watching narrative and coming up with this.
Exactly.
But the line that everyone was taking is, oh, look, he's weak on China. He's really pro-China. And you know what? The Chinese love him. And I'm like, that is not what any of that said. And it was just wild, Zeb, is that I got a couple thousand retweets, over 1 million views on that thread.
Well done.
And you have this whole European policy edifice, all these different think tankers. And some of the lines are just so ridiculous. I'm surprised and a bit embarrassed for them when I think the line that they pivoted to because no one was like, I read French fluently and I can write it diplomatic level fluently too, just like you. So nobody disagreed with me on content. Nobody disagreed with me on a professional level here. But the line they took was, if he's just being so fancy, then nobody will understand them, and that's not fair. And then there's some French speaker and some honest French people who are like, no, I understood what he said, and he's got it right, because the French can tell you to F off in a diplomatic context without using curse words.
They make it sound nice.
And it's, in fact, the nicer it sounds,
the worse it is.
A little subtlety. Okay, so let's say I'm describing, if we're at a party, you're not there, Zev, and I say, somebody asked me about Zev Shalev, who by the way, audience knows I love you. And somebody asked me, what do you think about Zev? Now, let's say we have two comments. And I go, well, Zev, he'd be dodgy at times, but, he comes up with some sharp things. Put this in the French language. And then put in the French language, he is a very intelligent guy and we do great work together. In a French dinner party context, the first part that he's kind of, he's a little dodgy. That would come off as way friendlier and more affectionate than he's very intelligent.
Yes.
And we do great work can mean he's not that intelligent and I don't like doing the work. It's like
they
flip some things around. There's all these holes in there. And so you have these people who are, look, like, I don't make comment on Greek elections. I don't make comment on Hungarian politics. I defer to people that are experts in that.
No translation.
But not translation.
Yeah.
And these people were going, well, the Elysee Palace got to pick and choose its quotes, so this is totally accurate. It's like, I'm an interpreter by training. I've been doing it over for 25 years. And the same set of words in Quebec and France don't mean the same thing. Between professions, they don't mean the same thing. And between people, they don't necessarily mean the same thing. It is a whole art. It's a whole science. And statecraft, I would love to sit down with people from State Department, from London, from Quai d'Orsay in France, and we could pick apart some sentences, but it's a fairly elite game. And there's all these people going, this is what Macron meant. But they had no, like, they were picking at his policy, or some comment that he had made about, like, we would not, I think it was something to the effect of, we would not accelerate a crisis with Taiwan. They're like, he's letting him get away with stuff. It's like, that's not what he said.
He never said, I'm going to be protecting Taiwan, like, no matter what, like the United States believes it should do. But that's not French policy. French policy is not that. And thank God they have a slightly unique policy around this, because it might deter America from doing something like that at any given point.
Even America doesn't say, yes, we would absolutely accelerate a crisis with China and Taiwan. No,
yeah, but they will say they'll fight for Taiwan.
And America is accelerating a crisis between China. We're the ones putting parking our aircraft carriers between there. We're doing stuff like that in the region. France isn't. No. And so it makes sense for France to center its policy on maybe French Polynesia and like keep to its knitting over there and go, and for the rest of it, we'll be a sounding board. The Chinese can tell us stuff that we'll pass to our United States allies, and that can be our relationship. And that's being weak on China policy. In fact, that's being a wingman to the United States, getting NATO's policy done. And there were all these experts, many of whom I understand to be paid at think tanks, which is just embarrassing for everybody involved, who don't seem to understand foreign policy, don't understand France, and don't understand the French language. And it's a poor combination for making comment about Macron's public statements.
Yeah, look, I think firstly, I didn't know you were so talented that you could translate stuff so impeccably, but thank you for now letting us know that, because I might need that one day. But also congratulations on that skill set, because I can't do anything like that. But also I would say that it's helpful at this point in time that Emmanuel Macron is trying to pull off some peace deal, as he tries to do regularly with the Chinese and the Russians, or trying to move them closer to some sort of peace settlement in Ukraine, without having to throw an extra lot of gas into a fire pit by saying, hey, I'd like to attack Taiwan as well if you go after Taiwan. Because I don't think it's helpful to a guy who's trying to mediate a peace deal. So he might have chosen some words that would have been hard to interpret or a little bit opaque, but that's okay. That's his job to do that sometimes. And
I thought he put the wood to Xi Jinping on that. And when he said something to the effect of, I remember more in French thing, he's like, I'm not sure if Ukraine is a diplomatic priority for China. And I was like, whoa, that doesn't sound very intense, but it's like, I don't know if you guys are freaking thinking about this, you morons. I mean, like the secondary effects of okay, they're partnered with Russia's at war. So for him to say, yeah, I don't know if they're really thinking about this, basically says they are idiots.
Look, there are countries in the world right now who are warmongering like crazy, and they would make it seem like it's the West, but it's definitely not the West. It's definitely Russia and it's definitely China that are escalating tensions around the world because they are intent on doing some sort of global war. That's what Ukraine is all about. That's what all this tension around Taiwan is all about. And the rest of the world would rather not go to a world war. Thank you very much. And is doing everything it can not to do that. And so the fact that China is siding with a genocidal dictator like Putin and killing people in Ukraine for no good reason, is exactly what he was pointing out, and in the subtle way that he might do it. But
we had, in case Macron is watching Narrative, which he should do,
but I tagged him, so you will, yeah.
So when we had Michael McKay on here, he had a great perspective on Putin's decision making that I really hadn't even considered until he brought it up, and it really stayed with me. And it was about how, remember how much the Russians want to erase Ukrainianness and have for decades. I was like, that's right. Because we were talking about why are these guys violently warmongering so much? They're just causing bad blood in the world community. They're not going to win this war in a conventional sense either. I think it might be worse if Vladimir Putin finds his way to Kyiv. His life will be immeasurably worse. So why is he doing it?
That's our first revived countdown show, and that was fun to do. Tell everyone where they can find out about your stuff and where they can find you.
I'm still writing stuff on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel. Stop on by.
Which is Game Theory Today. And it's
if you're going to look me up, just look up Eric Garland.
I look up Eric Garland.
ERIC, Garland.
I did go through some of your great shows the other day. They're really terrific, and people need to check them out. If you want to support Narrative, you can do it by going to patreon.com/narrative. If you want to support us by watching on YouTube and subscribing on YouTube, we'd really appreciate it. So hit that subscribe button. Or if you want to join as a member on YouTube, you can also join. On those fine notes, I'm going to say goodnight to you. We shall be back on Thursday night for episode 4 of Spy Murdoch. We go back to the 1970s. We'll find out all about what Roy Cohn and Roger Stone were doing with Richard Nixon. Yes, Richard Nixon and Roy Cohn did do stuff together. All sorts of mobbed up activity, and how in 1976, we already knew that Ronald Reagan was going to be president in 1980. We'll tell you how. All of that is coming up on Thursday's episode of Spy Murdoch. Every minute of Narrative's reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives. One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.